Hello YouTube, and welcome to my show, Sexism in Movies and TV. For 5 years I've been doing this show, and usually in a new seasonal intro, I give the reasons as to why I do it. Well, I've come up with some new reasons, in addition to the ones that I would give out in the last intro. I do this show to point out all of the horrible misandry, which means hatred of men and boys, that happens on mostly American TV and in American movies. But the really sad part of this whole thing is the fact that we're so desensitized to it that a lot of people can predict when it's coming. And what's even worse is that there are some people who actually find it funny. Okay, a new reason I thought of as to why this show must continue is because the toxic portrayal of men and boys that comes from American film and television is actually the one very big factor as to why men and boys basically have such low self-esteem. And the other half of the reason as to why stuff like this gives young men such low self-esteem is because we live in a world where stuff like this is constantly everywhere, all over the TV screens, all over the internet, all over social media. And if a young man or boy is not in a relationship, assuming he's 13 or older, his peers will instantly start picking on him and calling him gay. Then throw in the fact that there are absolutely no positive male role models on TV or in movies for the most part, and when some actually do appear, these insane feminists will instantly label it toxic masculinity and do whatever they can to make sure that it's ripped off the air and essentially replaced by their own pro-feminist, anti-man, anti-boy propaganda. Another reason why I do this show is to point out the fact that the corporations who make these movies and shows, they want to gain social brownie points, which is why in most Western franchises there are no positive male role models. They seek to gain social brownie points by essentially trading old stereotypes for new ones. They think they're being progressive when they're not. They just exchanged good archetypes for bad archetypes. And they do this to be progressive and get social brownie points. And it usually ends like this. And the third and final reason as to why I do this show is because the portrayal of men and boys, not just in movies and TV, but in all media, has become horrific. To the point where it's downright dehumanizing. And I could see some kid's little sister treating him like bullshit because the characters she watches on TV treat the men and boys around them like bullshit. And it could either lead to this boy becoming abusive towards his sister, or developing really low self-esteem. So anyways, in closing, this show exists to point out the horrible misandry that has infected movies and TV. Now, with that said, on with the review. In the 60s, the Flintstones had 2 harem girl scenes. There was a harem girl scene in the Johnny Bravo episode, The Prince and the Pinhead. And Desiree from Danny Phantom was a harem girl herself, be in life before she died. Now, you want to know how you essentially take the harem trope and kill it with fire? Well, you basically swap the genders and give a woman her own personal male harem. And this may not, this might not have been that obvious, but this episode of Sexism in Movies and TV is actually a bitch monster segment. Because Gigi here, the male harem concept is her entire thing. That is her shtick as a character on Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, an Adult Swim cartoon that I actually really did like. But in retrospect, if there was any episode of the show I said I downright hated, it would be the ones with this whore in it. Now, this bimbo only appeared in 2 episodes, and I'm pretty sure that's because the writers actually knew she was a horrible character. After Harvey put on a few pounds in the episode Trio's Company, he signs up for a gym membership where Gigi teaches aerobics. After he sees her, and after she says, "Let's get physical," he says that this is going quicker than he expected, because he instantly then, for some reason, assumes that they're on a date, and says first there'd be dinner, then a movie, and then he'd say something that would make her completely forget she was ever interested in him in the first place. And then Phil walks in, and we get the misdirect that Gigi is Phil's girlfriend. And as the episode progresses, we find out that Gigi will basically make out with anything with a penis. Whenever Harvey calls Gigi, she's never home, and her answering machine always leaves an innuendo implying that she's with another man. And then Gigi shows up at Harvey's apartment at 4:30 a.m., essentially to move in with him. And when I say move in, I mean she's just going to use her feminine wiles to manipulate and mooch off him. And after keeping Harvey up all night, when he actually tries to kiss her, she seems unbelievably repulsed at the idea, which puts the idea in Harvey's head that they should not be living together. And then Gigi instantly breaks down into this fake crying act because she's an entitled bitch. And she calls him Harry. She doesn't even know his name. In the next scene, Harvey is ignoring his client yet again. Oh, I forgot to mention, one thing that's really insulting about this episode is throughout this episode, Harvey is portrayed as a boner-driven animal who is completely neglectful of his client and will only take the case if the client is willing to help Harvey find out if Gigi is interested in him. In all fairness, the answer should be no. She's literally mooching off him, no different than a common parasite. She didn't even know his name and has been seen making out with at least 4 different men by the point the episode has been running for over 5 minutes. He asks Phil if he and Gigi are dating. Phil says no, and Gigi was hiding underneath Phil's desk. And then the episode becomes really insulting as Harvey brings up the fact that she's a bimbo, she's making out with another man and completely ignoring him. And then Harvey freaks out when he finds out that Gigi has been married. And when Harvey finds out she was divorced 7 times, it turns out that was actually a false assumption. Gigi apparently doesn't believe in divorce. And that kind of makes this whole thing... this episode took the harem concept and flipped it on its head, saying, well, let's see what it would be like if one woman had over 7 husbands. Believe me when I say nothing good would come of that. And then she admits that not only does she plow the guy she's married, she also has sex with essentially any man she finds attractive. Anyways, Harvey manipulates Inch High Private Eye to get the dirt on whether or not Gigi likes him or not. And yeah, she saw him as worthy of being in her harem. And the episode ends with Gigi getting married to Harvey, some guy whose name I don't know, Phil, Peanut, and their bear all at once. You know, if it actually occurred to him that this relationship is not worth it, this episode would have had a fucking purpose. I mean, it comes under the assumption that all men are boner-driven animals, which they are not. Oh, and believe me when I say, the next episode that I intend to get into is going to show why a gender-swapped harem concept, i.e., one woman married to a bunch of men, would be a bad thing. And in the episode Grape Juiced, which was this bimbo's second and final appearance, she has finally gotten pregnant. I mean, after all the men she's been with, and countless times she's had sex, I mean, her being pregnant is, by all means, something that was inevitable. So, she basically just uses this as an excuse to mooch off Harvey by essentially telling him he's the father. This goes on throughout the entire episode. Harvey tries to do his job, and Gigi basically shows up so that Harvey can buy her a new dress, or a crib for her baby, or for anything, because she's a parasite. And the episode ends with the revelation that Grape Ape is actually the father of Gigi's child. Not to mention the fact that this guy, who was put on trial for using steroids in the Olympics, was the character that Harvey was defending in court. Which kind of makes this its own unique kick in the balls. And you see, this is how you destroy something like the harem trope. You basically swap the genders, and we basically get a situation where Gigi, who will have sex with anyone as long as they have a penis, essentially ends up getting pregnant. And she then basically uses it as an excuse to mooch off of Harvey, even though he was not the father. And essentially, even though she said she was, it wouldn't matter if he was or not. She only chose him because he would have been the best provider, even though that wouldn't have lasted very long. I mean, she didn't go to Phil because he's crazy. And throughout the episode, she essentially interrupted Harvey and kept him from doing his job, either to buy her something or to do something that she's too lazy to do on her own, that she would normally actually have to do, assuming that she was actually pregnant, which she was. You see, there's a reason why this works where this doesn't. You see, with this, you have a larger family, and you always know who the father is. With this, you can only have one kid at a time, and no one really knows who the father is. Realistically, I mean, if this happened in real life, this woman would only be able to pump out one kid at a time, and you'd have no clue who the father is. She'd be able to essentially squeeze her male harem for every cent that they're worth, where on the other hand, with this, the guy'd be able to have multiple kids, and he's most likely the one providing for those kids, thus putting this in the moral right, where this is nothing short of an abuse of the American legal system. And yes, I know my points on this came from machovideo.com's video where there's a girl bashing feminists, but that does not make any of my points less valid, nor does it make her points less valid. And I just wanted to get this elephant out of the room because it was kind of obvious that that's where I got some of these points from. In preparation for this video, I found out that there is apparently a harem wiki, which kind of supports the idea that this is a very popular and well-liked trope in all forms of mediums, but I digress. If anything, the episode Grape Juiced did nothing more than prove that the idea of a male harem is nothing more than an abuse of the legal system, and something that is destined to bring failure to any and all of the unfortunate SOBs who are part of a woman's male harem. Which, here's something that kind of is, well, it's a point I want to bring up. You see, usually in movies and TV, if a man has a harem, he's usually a king or a sultan or something. On American TV, if a woman has a harem, it's apparently because she's really attractive and doesn't really need to choose, as she can date all of these guys at once and use them for different things. Bringing up the pervert trope, the writing would assume that all men are boner-driven animals, which they are not. And, yeah. In all fairness, the male harem would not go over at all if put in a realistic context. Say what you will about this guy, but at least he's providing for his women. I mean, he's rich, he has money. He essentially can give them a better life. what does this woman offer? In all fairness, it doesn't really matter how attractive a woman is. Eventually, her youth and beauty are going to fade. But, ironically enough, since every trope that could appear on TV or in a movie nowadays only exists to be either exists to be dissected, inverted, or to subvert expectations, that ironically would be an interesting movie. Imagine a young woman like Gigi here having a male harem, but then one day her youth and beauty begin to fade, and the perverts who once bent to her every will and spoiled her rotten essentially just left her. I mean, it would be an interesting character arc, but at the same time, it would be a pretty unique form of karmic punishment. She used sex to control them and mooch off them, and now that she can't do that, they're gone. And it would be a form of ironic punishment because they provided everything for her. The only thing she gave them in return was what was between her legs. Okay, now that I've covered both of this slut's 2 appearances on Harvey Birdman, I'm gonna end the review by saying she's a worthless bimbo, a good-for-nothing parasite, a shit character, and the writers were definitely in the right to never use her again after season 2. That's it. That's all. The review is hereby over.